Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Why are you afraid? Jesus asked his friends. Have you still no faith? These questions haunted me this week as I watched the footage of the destruction of Hurricane Harvey. Being caught in the overwhelming power and devastation of such a storm can reveal to us what our faith is made of. In the moment of terror, in the immediacy of danger, we may almost reflexively call out to God for safety. In the adrenaline rush of survival, we often feel that deeply spiritual instinct and connection. There are no atheists in foxholes, someone once said. But as the danger subsides and the waters recede, as we have a moment to catch our breath and to think more deeply about what has just happened, our questions about faith, our questions about God, may become more complicated. In the legal language of insurance policies, natural disasters are referred to as acts of God. It's a term that speaks to those events that no human being could control or reasonably prevent against. It's kind of in a category all by itself. And I get what they are saying. But while acts of God might be a tidy explanation for an underwriter, theologically, it's very messy, very problematic. Now, I have to say, I have a little trepidation around preaching this sermon this morning because I so want to be an agent of comfort, of theological comfort in this moment. Well, we here in New Jersey are not in the eye of the storm this time, but we have been shaken by what we've seen in Texas, and maybe some of us are flashing back to the devastation and the fear of Superstorm Sandy, and we would love to hear some words of reassurance that God's got this. But I don't think those kinds of words are enough right now. I believe that we are keeping our faith too shallow if we do not allow this experience to move us to some deeper and harder conversations about God. I believe our faith requires it. Now, experts are calling this a catastrophic event, unprecedented, record-shattering, once in a 1,000-year storm. And yet we know there will be more of these. Climate scientists are very clear on that. Water temperatures are getting warmer, sea levels are rising, and the condition for massive hurricanes will continue to exist in the Gulf Coast and around the world. It might not be this year or next year, but it will happen again. There will be more destruction and death and devastation. And of course, there will be more questions. Could this have been prevented? How can we rebuild? Should we relocate? And for people of faith, how do we find God in all of this? This morning, as the waters are just beginning to recede in Houston, as people are slowly returning to their homes to see what's left of them, as rescue workers continue to search for survivors, as churches are holding their services in high school gyms or makeshift shelters, or maybe not at all, I imagine that this question is on the minds and the hearts of many people. How do we find faith in a flood? Like so many towns in the Bible Belt, Houston is home to a tremendous number of churches, many faithful people. And as messy as it may be, this question is not an abstraction for them. Human beings are meaning makers. We often turn to our faith to help us do that. But unfortunately, and we see it all the time, this can also lead to some very damaging theology. Already the televangelists are looking to place blame for God's wrath on the unbelievers among them. One actually cited Houstonian support for abortion rights and their previous lesbian mayor as the cause for the storm. That is nothing but scapegoating in the guise of religion. It's ignorant, it's toxic, And it's frankly ridiculous. The storm clearly did not single out the sinners and spare the faithful. No storm ever does. God doesn't play favorites with the weather. No, if we take our faith seriously, we must risk going deeper than those facile explanations. Standing in the middle of the wreckage, we are faced with some unavoidable questions. In moments like this, our conception of who and what God is laid bare. We can try and couch it in a lot of ways, but here's the theological bottom line. Either God can change nature or he cannot. Either she will or she won't. I realize that both prospects are very unsettling for us. It's easy to see God in the historic rescue of frightened children from a flooded house. It's more difficult to see her in the fate of people who did not make it out alive. We want to believe in an all-powerful God who can change the course of storms and spare innocent people. But if we believe that, we must also accept that God could have saved lives, but chose not to. So as people who do believe in God, how do we live in that tension? Where do we go from here? Now, I know this may sound rather startling and perhaps even a bit heretical to some of you, but I have come to embrace an understanding of God that takes a very big risk when it comes to this question. Now, it comes out of a theology called process theology, and I'm going to try not to get all geeky and technical on you, but bear with me. Process theology was begun about 100 years ago when a man named Alfred North Whitehead, a British physicist and a devout Christian, began to see some profound connections between theology and science around the nature of energy. You see, physics teaches us that all the energy in the universe today is the same energy that ever was. What started in the Big Bang still exists today. New energy isn't created and old energy doesn't die. It just changes form. Through his lens of faith, Whitehead saw God as the initiator of the Big Bang. Let there be light. And God's divinity as the energy that exists in all that was, is, and ever will be. Never dying, just changing forms. He came to believe that all the wonders of creation emerging from that Big Bang are the result of a divine call and response process between God, the Creator, and the ever-evolving creation. For every new creature, every grain of sand, every shooting star, every law of nature are the result of this interdependent relationship. God gives power to creation, and creation gives power back to God. There is no separation. We are all in it together. So what does this have to do with my theology of Hurricane Harvey? Well, in short, perhaps the most radical thing about process theology is that it challenges the traditional understanding of God as all-powerful. God is omnipotent. Instead, it imagines that God is in partnership with nature and not in control of it. The creative power of nature and the destructive power of nature is shared with God. One does not control the other. And all that we experience, the calm, starry night and the eye of the hurricane, is the result of their interdependence. God cannot control the path of the storm any more than the storm can. It is not who God is. Now, I know that flies in the face of some of our most beautiful scriptures and certainly a great deal of traditional doctrine. And I know that letting go of the idea of God's omnipotence can feel very uncomfortable, terrifying even. But I also believe it offers us some liberating and life-giving ways to experience God. For if we are no longer wrestling with how to believe in a God who would allow Hurricane Harvey to hit Houston, we can focus on where we see God at work within it, if we are no longer dependent on an all-powerful God operating outside of us, we can see her within the vulnerability of human life, the vulnerability of creation. We can see him in the face of those who survived and in the faces of those who didn't. And we are freed to see how we can participate in this moment. We can focus on our partnership with God instead of asking, who is God punishing and who is God saving in this storm? We are freed to ask, how are we called to help? During the height of the storm, I spoke to a friend of mine who's local, whose family is all in Houston. It's incredibly humbling, she told me, to come up against situations like this where there is no available solution. I couldn't get them out or even get to them if I had unlimited funds. There are no open roads, no flights out. She goes on, living in the modern world fools us into thinking that we are secure, that all our miraculous technology will keep us safe. But we are every bit as vulnerable as the first humans were. Nature has the capacity to obliterate every structure and every system we put in place, just as it did 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 years ago. Underneath it all we really have are the connections we make with each other. And I believe that is where we find God in the midst of all of this, in the connections we make with each other. When disasters occur, it can be quite amazing to see how people come together. In the midst of a crisis, old tribal divisions don't seem to matter so much anymore. Ordinary squabbles over religious doctrine or practice seem completely unimportant. If someone is carrying my child to safety, I don't much care if they are Muslim or Christian or atheist. If someone needs my help in digging out 3 feet of muck in their living room, I don't much care if they are Democrat or Republican. If someone is reaching for my hand in a rushing river, I don't care if they have a Black Lives Matter t-shirt on or a red baseball cap. In those moments of vulnerability, our human connection is all that matters. If you are wondering where God is in the storm, look at the people who have flooded Houston with an outpouring of compassion, supplies, money, support. Ordinary folks who came from hundreds of miles away and worked tirelessly around the clock. Every color, every age, every creed, every orientation, leaving their own dry homes, leaving their own safe families. They were the hearts and hands of God, a powerful manifestation of God's love, God's energy in human form in the midst of the storm. This recovering is just starting, and the work ahead is enormous, and it will be exhausting and frustrating, and there will be many moments when the people of Texas and all of us will continue to wonder where God is in all of this. If we are brave enough, we will ask those hard questions. And if we are faithful enough, we will be willing to see where God is with new eyes. Not outside of creation, orchestrating hurricanes and floods, sparing some people and condemning others, but within all of it, the life and death, the loving, the helping, the weeping, the holding, the restoring, sharing the experience with us. Jesus taught us that. As the human face of God, he weathered the same storms we do. He felt loss and pain and devastation. He asked hard questions, but he knew within all of it, he was never alone. God was with him and within him, just as God is in Houston this morning. And that is Jesus' promise to us, whether in a wave-tossed boat or around the communion table in this beautiful sanctuary. God is in all of it, and we are in God. We are not alone. There can be no stronger faith in a flood than that. May it be so. Amen.